The deployment of U.S. Navy warships in the Southern Caribbean is not a routine patrol. It is a planned show of force. This strategic move is a direct response to a threat posed by Latin American drug cartels and their alleged support from the Venezuelan government. This naval presence is the largest in the Southern Caribbean in years, involving warships, a nuclear-powered submarine, and thousands of personnel positioned near Venezuela's coastline. The clear message is that the U.S. is ready to disrupt the drug trafficking networks that fuel violence and bring drugs, including fentanyl-laced cocaine, into America. This military action comes after years of frustration with traditional law enforcement methods. Previous efforts like interdictions and joint task forces were not able to stop the flow of drugs. Intelligence reports confirmed what agents on the ground already knew. Cartels had become deeply involved in every part of the drug supply chain. They use weak government control, corruption, and geography to move drugs through Venezuelan ports and waters. To Washington, this was no longer just a crime problem. It was a national security threat that required a military response. The timing of this deployment is not a coincidence. By calling major cartels foreign terrorist organizations, the U.S. government opened up new legal and operational powers for the military. These powers now support this deployment, blurring the lines between fighting drug crime and fighting terrorism. This is why the vessels patrolling off Venezuela are not just Coast Guard cutters, but also destroyers, amphibious ships, and a submarine capable of both gathering intelligence and carrying out precision strikes. The naval presence serves two purposes. First, it is meant to disrupt drug routes through constant pressure on known maritime corridors. The operation is described as persistent surveillance and interdiction, with drones, P-8 Poseidon aircraft, and satellites feeding real-time intelligence to commanders at sea. Every tracked boat, intercepted signal, and seized shipment reduces the cartel's freedom to operate. Second, the deployment is a signal to the cartels, regional governments, and especially to President Nicolas Maduro, that the U.S. has both the ability and the willingness to take more aggressive action if needed. Maduro's government has called the deployment an act of aggression and a prelude to invasion. Venezuela has responded by deploying its own warships and drones along its coast. This has increased tension in an already unstable region. However, U.S. officials say the mission is focused on targeting cartels and their logistics, not on starting a conflict with Venezuela, unless U.S. forces are attacked. The intelligence behind this buildup is clear. Cartel networks are believed to operate freely from Venezuela, controlling key shipping hubs and using ports and airfields to move large drug shipments north. These are not just isolated smugglers. They are organized groups with the ability to challenge local authorities and destabilize entire regions. By placing naval forces within range of these hubs, the U.S. has created a platform for rapid response, from interdiction to possible strikes. This posture is as much about stopping the cartels as it is about direct action. It shows that the U.S. is serious about restoring stability in the region. On the water, the pace of operations is constant. Warships patrol close to Venezuelan waters, testing response times and collecting data on coastal defenses. A submarine operates silently, mapping communications and tracking high-value targets. Surveillance aircraft monitor every vessel and signal. This is what modern deterrence looks like, a combination of constant presence, superior technology, and the possibility of escalation. Critics warn of the risks, saying one misstep could lead to open conflict. But U.S. officials argue that allowing cartels to operate freely poses a much greater risk to regional stability and American communities. The U.S. deployment is unprecedented not only for its size, but for its flexibility. By combining surface ships, submarines, and aircraft, the U.S. has created a force that can both conduct constant surveillance and rapid strikes. This dual capability changes the way cartels operate. Moving drugs is no longer just a question of timing and secrecy. It is a gamble against a military force that can see, track, and if needed, destroy. The stakes are high because the drug problem is immense. The Southern Caribbean is a key route for drug trafficking, moving billions of dollars of drugs each year. These shipments fund violence and corruption. The U.S. sees this network as a strategic threat. The goal of the mission is to dismantle the infrastructure that allows cartels to operate without being punished. Sailors and Marines in the region say the mission is not about showing off, but about making an impact. Maduro has tried to project confidence, saying that no one will invade Venezuela. But his government has also taken defensive measures, increasing naval patrols and surveillance. The tension is real, a high-stakes standoff where both sides know the risks. The outcome depends on decisions made in both Washington and Caracas, but also on the cartels themselves. If trafficking continues, pressure for more aggressive action will increase. If the U.S. presence disrupts the networks, the mission could remain a persistent, non-violent one. Either way, the goal is to deny cartels a safe place to operate. In a broader sense, this deployment shows a new approach to security in the Western Hemisphere. For decades, the focus was on partnerships and law enforcement. Now, it is on military presence that treats criminal networks as strategic enemies. It is a message to allies and rivals that the U.S. is willing to use its power to back up its words. For ordinary Americans, the connection between warships off Venezuela and safer streets at home is direct. Every pound of drugs seized at sea is a pound that will not reach U.S. cities. This strategy is simple. Attack the problem at its source before it gets to the border. The tightening U.S. naval presence has also exposed weaknesses in Maduro's alliances. His power has relied on a network of political loyalists, military leaders, and cartel partners. This system worked because the threat of direct conflict with the U.S. seemed distant. Now, with warships in the Caribbean, that illusion is gone. The fragility of his alliances is now visible. Maduro's power is based on a system of payments. Loyalty is bought with access to illegal money, control of land, and the promise of protection. This includes his relationships with armed groups and drug organizations like the Cartel de los Soles. This arrangement depends on stability and the belief that Maduro can protect his partners. The U.S. military pressure is weakening that belief. Smaller partners, like local militias, are starting to feel the pressure. U.S. intelligence leaks have exposed names and operations that were once secret. Suddenly, being close to the regime seems like a risk, not a form of protection. The loyalty of these groups is shifting as they consider their own survival. This hesitation is a dangerous sign for the regime. In a system built on fear, a perception of weakness can cause a collapse. The border regions show this clearly. Smaller paramilitary groups that once controlled drug routes are reportedly slowing down their operations or moving to less exposed routes. On the coast, there is a slowdown in smuggling, a sign that operators fear being caught and are waiting to see what happens. For Maduro, these shifts are more than economic problems. They signal a potential breakdown of the support that holds his power together. The tension is also high within Venezuela's military. Commanders who have made money from drug trafficking are facing new pressure. The U.S. has said it will hold individuals, not just institutions, accountable. The risk of staying loyal to the regime is increasing. While the top officers publicly remain loyal, it is becoming harder to ignore the conflict between their personal survival and their loyalty. The political alliances are also fragile. Regional governors and local leaders who acted as a link between Caracas and criminal groups are now facing international isolation or sanctions. Some have already started to quietly distance themselves. These are cracks in the image of unity that has allowed Maduro to project strength. Internationally, the escalation is increasing Maduro's isolation. What he called resistance is now being seen as criminal involvement. The global view is changing from a political conflict to a direct challenge against organized crime. This shift is dangerous for his allies within Venezuela, as it makes their relationship with the regime a matter of criminal exposure, not political loyalty. The Venezuelan opposition, which has been divided for a long time, sees this as an opportunity. There are signs of activity in areas where the regime's control was once total. Community leaders are organizing more openly and networks are sharing intelligence with international groups. The fear that once stopped local opposition is being replaced by a careful hope that change is possible. For Maduro, the situation is a major threat. He cannot appear weak, but every show of strength risks exposing the problems in his alliances. The recent display of naval forces and drones was as much about showing confidence internally as it was about deterring external threats. But these displays have their own risks. The more resources he uses for this, the less he has to manage internal problems and keep his allies loyal. The drug cartels, who are essential for Maduro's survival, are watching with growing concern. For them, stability means profit. If they begin to see Maduro as a risk, their support could disappear. This is the real danger of the current situation. It is a psychological and political battle. By increasing the pressure and showing the regime's criminal alliances, the US is forcing Maduro's partners to face their own vulnerability. Every hesitation or delay is a potential break in an alliance that cannot afford any cracks. And breaks tend to spread. A single defection by a mid-level commander or a local leader could cause a chain reaction. In a system built on payments and threats, loyalty is bought, and when the promise of protection is gone, survival becomes the main goal. This is what keeps authoritarian leaders up at night, the fear that their own network will fall apart from the inside. For those watching, this weakness is both an opportunity and a risk. It could lead to the quick decline of Maduro's power, opening paths for a transition or more action by the opposition. The risk, however, is that a cornered regime, seeing its alliances disappear, might act with violence. This could mean more repression at home or a confrontation abroad to rally support. For ordinary Venezuelans, these high-stakes actions create an unstable reality. The US deployment and its consequences show how strategic pressure can achieve results that brute force might not. It shows allies and rivals that the US can impose costs and change power balances without open conflict. For Maduro's partners, the lesson is harsher. Their weaknesses are no longer just an idea. They are on display for the world to see. In a world where reputation and fear are as important as weapons and money, this exposure is a wound that may never fully heal. If this continues, the legacy of this operation may not be measured by battles fought or land seized, but by something more lasting: the quiet destruction of a myth. The myth that these armed groups were untouchable. The myth that their control was total. The myth that they could forever defy international pressure. These myths are crumbling under the weight of a naval presence that does not need to fire a shot to show its dominance. And when the history of this moment is written, that may be the most important detail of all: that the most humiliating defeat for these groups came not from a firefight, but from the quiet realization that they were vulnerable, overextended, and unable to match the discipline, technology, and resolve of the forces against them.